This is Michael Coffey, and this is a Tiny Desk sermon, a first look at the readings for this coming Sunday, and some impromptu reflections on them. This Sunday is the big one. It's Easter Sunday, the resurrection of our Lord, and the assigned text, depending on which way you go, is either Mark or John. I am in favor of Mark. I have a great affinity for Mark's gospel and its way of telling the story, and I'm going to use that. And I need to talk more about the text after I read it. Mark chapter 16. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of James and Salome bought spices so that they might go and anoint him, Jesus. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They had been saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb?" When they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man, dressed in a white robe, sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, there is the place where they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. It's a very, very surprising ending to the gospel story. It is so surprising that early scribes passing along this text often added other endings to it because it seemed unfinished. Many scholars today would say that's the original ending of Mark's gospel. Some would say maybe the last section got lost, but it seems awfully coincidental that it got lost at that point. And it seems to me, rhetorically, if you look at the whole Gospel of Mark, that this is a perfect and astounding ending to Mark's story. So how do we face the good news of the resurrection? What do we think this means for us today? In Mark's Gospel, the story is permeated by people who live in fear and anxiety. Fear of people who have power, fear of losing their lives, fear of just losing their status before other people, but most of all, and surprisingly, fear of Jesus and the kingdom that he brings and how he brings it. And in the story, the disciples really never accept Jesus' own self-description as the one who will be the Messiah, who is rejected and suffers and dies for the sake of the kingdom, and then God will raise him up. And they certainly don't accept that Jesus says, "And you are called to follow the same way of the cross in your lives, to live for the kingdom, not through domination and control and military might and political power, but through becoming a servant to the world, a servant community to the world." And that's how God will bring the kingdom. Nobody wants that. Everybody's afraid of it. By the end of the story, the last word that we hear in the English translation is afraid. And the story ends telling us that the women left and didn't tell anybody. Well, we know that isn't true historically, but rhetorically, in the text, that means something. It means, one, that we're left asking, well, how? How does the story get told? How do people carry on a life of faith in the face of such fear, of the power of the empire that crushes those who live for God's kingdom in Jesus' way? How do we carry on the story? What's the next page in the story? And the text is really very challenging. It's really calling us to be willing to pick up where the story ends, because the story isn't over. It's calling us to be one, very afraid of our fear, our fear of following the way of Jesus, the way of love for the enemy, the way of vulnerable commitment to serving those in need, and a loving confrontation with those who oppose God's ways. And in doing that, to know that there is both a cost and that God is faithful. Whew, that's a big story to carry on, and the resurrection is the key part of the story. That God really does stick with Jesus in the way of the kingdom, in the way of the cross, and God really does stick with those who pick up that cross, pick up that way, and live for the kingdom in spite of the cost. So the resurrection story is one that first doesn't just kind of ask us to just come with sort of unmitigated joy and exuberance. It asks us first to say, it's not easy to get there. There's a lot of fear. And then to say, can we celebrate anyway? Can we celebrate with our fear, with our anxiety, with our doubt that resurrection happens, or that the way of Jesus really is the way? And all of that, can we still see the empty tomb, hear the message, believe what Jesus said way back in the beginning, and metaphorically go on to Galilee, go on to where ministry happens, where the kingdom is proclaimed and enacted through deeds of mercy and healing, and confront those who resist God's ways in the world. That's the power of the resurrection for us who are living out faith with a lot of fear, but with a hope that will not die. God bless you this Easter, and may new life come to us all.